My investigation into architectural mysteries never intended to uncover giants. I was simply documenting structural peculiarities, door frames reaching absurd heights, grand staircases built on an inhuman scale, furniture proportioned far beyond what any ordinary person could use comfortably. These were things I cataloged as design extravagance or symbolic architecture, nothing more than historical footnotes to be acknowledged and forgotten, until I discovered the images, not illustrations, not legends, not stories distorted through centuries of retelling, photographs. Genuine photographic documentation from the 1850s through the 1890s, depicting individuals of staggering height positioned beside people of normal stature. The size difference was so extreme, these images appeared manipulated, yet they weren't forgeries. The photographic grain was consistent throughout. The illumination fell naturally. The shadow placement followed physical laws. These pictures came from an era before technology existed to fabricate such convincing deceptions. That realization shattered every conventional explanation I'd encountered. My research intensified, revealing photograph after photograph. Carte de visite prints from the 1860s, cabinet portraits from the 1870s, tintype exposures showing individuals, both men and women, measuring 8 feet tall, sometimes exceeding 10 feet. These weren't carnival attractions promoted as such. These weren't entertainers with documented identities and touring schedules. Simply people. Ordinary citizens photographed in professional studios, dressed in contemporary fashion, occasionally surrounded by relatives of standard height. The British Museum holds several in their collections. The Smithsonian references them briefly before classifying them as medical peculiarities requiring no additional examination. French archives contain comparable images, properly indexed and stored away. Russian imperial documentation mentions individuals of exceptional stature filling ceremonial positions. Always the identical approach: document, classify, dismiss. Never probe deeper, never question the implications. Why were they so numerous? Why do these photographs concentrate within particular decades, predominantly 1850 through 1900, then abruptly cease? Why do historical accounts describe these individuals not as abnormalities or spectacles, but as regular community members holding influential positions, serving as sentries, supervisors, construction foremen? And here's what disturbs me most. Numerous photographs capture these towering figures standing before structures, enormous structures, buildings featuring doorways that appear ridiculously oversized for average humans, yet perfectly scaled for the subjects photographed. Buildings we've been assured were constructed for magnificence or psychological impact. Buildings that suddenly become logical when you position a 9-foot individual within the frame. Once this registers, you cannot ignore it. I began documenting doorway dimensions in governmental structures from the 18th and 19th centuries, 12 to 15 feet in height. Not entrance portals designed to impress visitors, interior passages, working corridors where architectural grandeur serves absolutely no function. Staircases featuring steps so elevated that standard height individuals must strain to navigate them efficiently. Furnishings, workstations, seating, sleeping quarters, discovered in estate liquidations and institutional collections, all proportioned slightly too large, all explained away as decorative pieces or custom built for unusually tall owners. But this isn't isolated to single buildings. This spans thousands. Courthouses throughout America, administrative complexes across Europe, governmental facilities in Russia, India, South America, all constructed during the same historical window, all displaying identical oversized proportions, all supposedly engineered this way for visual appeal, despite obvious impracticality, despite increased construction expenses, despite serving no logical purpose unless the occupants weren't average-sized. The pattern emerges with disturbing consistency. In St. Petersburg, administrative complexes from the 18th century featured 12-foot doorways and rear corridors. In Buenos Aires, civic structures contain staircases demanding extraordinary stride lengths. In Delhi, colonial period government facilities allegedly constructed by and for British officials include furnishings scaled to make a 6-foot individual feel diminutive. These weren't symbolic chambers. These were functional facilities, offices, administrative headquarters, the routine architecture of authority and management. For whom were they engineered? This question makes Tartaria unavoidable. For those unfamiliar, Tartaria emerges on cartographic documents from the 1700s and early 1800s as an expansive domain covering northern Asia. Not folklore, not mythology, an actual designated territory appearing in reference works, geographical charts, and historical documentation with the same matter-of-fact certainty as France or Spain. Then, during the mid-1800s, it disappears. Not subjugated, not redesignated, erased. The maps undergo revision. The encyclopedias eliminate any mention. The historical chronicles pretend it never existed at all. Yet the architecture persists. Colossal stone constructions across Central Asia, Russia, Mongolia, buildings of impossible magnitude and engineering precision, doorways dimensioned for giants, corridors that resonate with emptiness, all allegedly erected by various empires or regional craftsmen with zero documentation, no authenticated construction chronicles, no rational explanation for achieving such architectural accomplishments with the technology supposedly accessible. What if the giants weren't aberrations? What if they served as administrators, supervisors, the guardian hierarchy of a civilization we've been conditioned to dismiss? What if Tartaria, whatever it genuinely represented, utilized these individuals not as curiosities, but as integral societal members, and the architecture reflects that truth? It clarifies the photographs, why they consistently appear formal and official, depicting these individuals in authoritative roles, why they vanish after the 1890s, precisely when final references to Tartaria disappear from official documentation, why the structures remain while the inhabitants have been eliminated from historical record. This presents a straightforward yet crucial question. If you intended to eliminate a civilization from collective consciousness, wouldn't you begin by removing the most conspicuous evidence, the individuals whose mere existence validates something else existed here? The photographic documentation isn't our only proof. Throughout the 1800s and early 1900s, newspapers across America consistently published discoveries of giant human skeletal remains, not scattered oddities, systematic findings. The New York Times, 1885, 7-foot skeleton unearthed in Michigan Mound. The San Diego Union, 1895, bones of exceptional dimensions discovered during railway excavation. The Middletown Signal, 1899, giant human remains exposed in Ohio. These weren't sensationalist publications. These were respected newspapers reporting what was then considered notable but not especially controversial. The descriptions detail skeletons measuring 7 to 12 feet in length, frequently located in organized burial grounds, regularly accompanied by objects indicating sophisticated metallurgical and architectural understanding. Then circumstances shifted. After roughly 1920, these accounts ceased, not progressively, immediately. Discoveries that once dominated headlines simply stopped appearing. The skeletons previously found, many were transferred to the Smithsonian Institution for additional examination. The Smithsonian currently maintains no such skeletons exist within their holdings. Missing, misplaced, lost during standard relocations. Hundreds of specimens all disappeared without adequate documentation. The correlation is too deliberate to dismiss. Discoveries reach their peak during the late 1800s, the identical period the giant photographs surface, the identical period Tartaria vanishes from cartography. Then everything stops. The photographs stop, the newspaper documentation stops, the maps transform, the encyclopedias rewrite themselves, as though someone determined certain inquiries were no longer permissible to pursue. Why would you conceal evidence of human biological variation? Why would you methodically eliminate physical proof challenging the conventional narrative of human history? Unless that proof indicated something more substantial, something organized, something implying a different structural framework to recent civilization than we've been instructed. Let me suggest something that sounds preposterous until you examine the evidence. What if the giants weren't monarchs? What if they constituted a specialized category? Guardians, supervisors, infrastructure and construction administrators. What if their stature was practical, not symbolic? What if buildings were scaled to them because they were the ones directing their construction and upkeep? It explains the architectural patterns. Why government facilities, courthouses, administrative centers, structures of oversight and authority feature oversized dimensions while residential districts remain human-scaled. Why the photographs depict giants in formal official contexts rather than domestic environments. Why historical documentation mentions them in supervisory and authoritative capacities, but rarely as traders, creatives, or ordinary workers. It explains the construction enigma. How were massive stone constructions built with such precision during the 1700s and 1800s? Perhaps they weren't erected by the civilizations we attribute them to. Perhaps they were constructed for those civilizations by a preceding society that employed individuals physically capable of manipulating stones, operating equipment, and directing construction at scales we consider impossible. And it explains the systematic elimination. If you're inheriting structures you didn't construct, inheriting technology you don't completely comprehend, inheriting architectural systems designed for a different type of human being, what's your response? You modify the narrative. You claim ownership. You revise the construction timelines, backdate the architects, and eliminate any evidence suggesting someone else preceded you. Consider this: how many mysterious construction methods suddenly become comprehensible if you assume the builders were physically larger and more powerful than contemporary humans? How many impossible engineering achievements become merely challenging if the laborers stood 9 feet tall? The evidence points toward something far more significant than random genetic anomalies. What troubles me most isn't the evidence itself, it's the orchestrated silence enveloping it. Academic institutions don't debate the giant skeletal remains, they act as though they never existed. Museums don't exhibit the photographs, they archive them in storage marked miscellaneous or unconfirmed. Historical organizations don't examine the architectural dimensions, they dismiss them as artistic preference. The pattern duplicates across disciplines, across nations, across generations of scholarship. It's not aggressive suppression, it's passive elimination. Inquiries that simply aren't raised, evidence that isn't scrutinized, connections that aren't established because establishing them produces conclusions incompatible with the accepted narrative. And when you identify it, when you arrange the evidence collectively, the photographs, the architecture, the newspaper documentation, the absent records, you encounter the identical reaction. Interesting, but insignificant, as though coincidence justifies everything, as though patterns hold no meaning, as though questioning why is somehow improper. But the why constitutes the entire purpose. Why did humans of extraordinary dimensions exist in adequate numbers to be routinely photographed and regularly discovered in burial locations? Why were they documented, then forgotten? Why does architecture from a specific era accommodate their dimensions? Why did these elements concentrate in identical geographical territories and time frames as Tartaria's elimination from cartographic documentation? And why, when you raise any of this in academic environments, does the dialogue immediately terminate? I continually return to the photographs. These weren't creatures, weren't mythology. They were people. Individuals with faces, attire, families. People who posed for formal portraits like everyone else during the 1800s. People whose existence was so unremarkable at the time that photographers saw no necessity to clarify or contextualize their presence. But we've rendered them remarkable by erasing them. We've made them impossible by denying they were ever possible. We've transformed documented reality into prohibited speculation. And through this process, we've lost something essential, not merely knowledge of their identity, but comprehension of our own nature, what we've forgotten, what we've inherited without understanding. The massive doorways persist. The oversized staircases still stand. The buildings that make no sense for human dimensions continue serving contemporary purposes, their original function obscured by centuries of adaptive reuse. We traverse them daily without questioning why. We accept official explanations without examining whether they actually explain anything. Because examining them requires accepting that history isn't a linear progression, that we might be inhabiting the remnants of something more advanced, something we didn't build, something we don't fully comprehend, that the giants in the photographs weren't deviations, but evidence of a different arrangement, a different society, a different reality. I encountered enormously proportioned seating in estate auctions and neglected museum storage facilities. Seating that makes no anatomical sense, not thrones, not ceremonial pieces intended to dominate or awe. Common seating, dining chairs, work chairs, sitting furniture designed for regular use, except they're dimensioned incorrectly. The seat elevation measures 30 to 36 inches from ground level, nearly twice the standard 18-inch height that accommodates normal human leg proportions. The backrests extend 7, sometimes 8 feet upward. The armrests positioned at a height that would leave an average person's arms suspended uselessly. Auction records classify them as ornamental furniture or exhibition pieces, as though people during the 1800s routinely commissioned seating they couldn't physically utilize merely for decorative purposes. Museum administrators label them oversized Victorian styling, without explaining why such designs manifest in government facilities, administrative offices, and courthouse waiting areas. Functional environments where comfort and usability would presumably be priorities. And then there are the implements themselves, the artifacts no institution wants to categorize. I'm referencing the massive wrenches discovered in demolition locations across Europe and North America, instruments measuring 4, 5, sometimes 6 feet in length, not decorative, not symbolic, functional implements with wear patterns, with the grip degradation that results from actual application. Tools engineered for hands considerably larger than ours. Museums classify them as industrial machinery, without explaining what industrial operation would necessitate a wrench weighing 200 pounds that requires operation by someone possessing the grip strength of 3 normal individuals. Auction establishments sell them as antique curiosities, without questioning why they were manufactured in such volumes that they continue appearing in estate liquidations, farm clearances, and structure demolitions over a century later. And suddenly the oversized implements and furniture aren't anomalies anymore. They're confirmation. So who were these giant people? Were they the protectors of Tartaria, the administrative hierarchy of a civilization we've been taught never existed, the supervisors of construction endeavors whose magnitude and precision we still cannot duplicate with contemporary technology? I don't possess definitive answers, only questions that accumulate, that build upon each other, that create a burden the official narrative cannot sustain. Why does the photographic evidence concentrate in the exact decades when Tartaria vanishes from maps? Why do architectural dimensions correspond with the scale of individuals in those photographs? Why do newspaper accounts of giant skeleton discoveries terminate precisely when references to advanced pre-industrial technology begin being omitted from historical chronicles? Not coincidence, not random variation, not independent anomalies that happen to align. Pattern. And when you recognize the pattern, when you trace it across continents and centuries, when you observe it materialize and disappear with suspicious precision, you must ask, what aren't we being informed? What did we inherit that we've chosen to forget? What knowledge was lost or concealed when the maps were redrawn and the giants disappeared from history? The buildings remember, even if we've forgotten. The photographs preserve what the encyclopedias erased. The evidence endures, waiting for someone willing to pose the questions everyone else has agreed not to ask. Who were the giants? Why did they vanish? And what else disappeared with them that we're still pretending was never here at all? If this evidence resonates with you, if these questions demand answers you're not getting from conventional sources, don't let this investigation end here. Share this information. Examine the architectural anomalies in your own community. Visit local museums and ask about oversized artifacts in their collections. Request access to newspaper archives from the 1800s and search for giant skeleton discoveries in your region. The truth hasn't been destroyed, it's been scattered, filed away, relabeled as insignificant, but it's still there, waiting to be reassembled by people willing to look beyond the sanitized narrative we've been given. The giants existed. The photographs prove it. The architecture confirms it. The historical record documents it before the documentation stops. What happened to them isn't ancient history, it's recent history, deliberately obscured. And if they could erase something this substantial, this visible, this thoroughly documented, what else have they removed from our understanding of who we are and where we came from? The investigation continues, but only if we refuse to accept the silence, only if we keep asking why.